What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Racially Speaking, a podcast dedicated to having real and honest conversations about race as it's viewed through the lenses of faith, family, and vocation. As always, I'm David Phipps, your host, and you are listening to episode 6. So, as I say every episode, I am really excited for you guys to hear this conversation between me and my guest. I recently was able to catch up with one of my very best friends from college and former roommate, former fellow English major, Mark Samudre. Dr. Mark Samudre, to be exact, as he has just recently become a full professor or assistant professor at the University of South Carolina. And he's just an all-around amazing guy. We, former roommates. We're in each other's weddings, and I'm just really excited for you guys to hear from him. As you'll hear, we spend a lot of time catching up at the very beginning. So I'm just gonna jump right in. So without further ado, I hope you guys enjoy this conversation between me and Mark. All right, what's up, Mark? I think we're recording. I got this new thing I'm trying out, so it says I'm recording. But dude, welcome. I'm freaking pumped to do this and to be talking to you. So I mean, I guess maybe a couple weeks ago, I was about to have to start the podcast by saying, dude, we have not talked in haven't seen each other in like 5-6 years. But if it hadn't been for the impromptu drive through South Carolina that the Phipps family took, we got to see you. So man, I'm so glad we got to see you just a few weeks ago. But
yeah,
dude, man, it's been too long. So how are you doing? Catch me up a little bit.
Yeah, man. Yeah, dude, everything's good. That trip was just so, it caught us off guard, and it was so nice and refreshing because Em and I were sitting there talking. It's like, man, we really miss the Phipps. We just got to go visit. We want to go back to Radford and just like take it to our campus, see everyone, all the friends we have down there. And then you guys came to us. That was awesome. Now, man, everything's good. You know, we live in South Carolina now. Been a bit nomadic with where we've lived since our time in Radford together. But it's been all good. You know, we're kind of setting down our camp here in Columbia, South Carolina. And it's been good stuff.
Yeah. So, I mean, to set the scene, we're driving back from Florida where, I mean, like 5 minutes off the exit, I looked at Caitlin. I'm like, hey, that sign said Columbia, South Carolina. That's where the Samudres are at, I think. What are the odds? You shoot them a text. We stop by for some dinner or something. You know, I thought the chances are slim. This is literally, I think we gave you 10 minutes notice. And then within like 30 seconds, you're like, when and where? No, I think you said, what Chipotle are you going to?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. And it was so like, there was only one surprise in that text. The only surprise was that you guys were coming. Yeah, I wasn't surprised that you guys were going to Chipotle.
Right. Always.
But and you guys hopped out the van, fully decked out in Disney wear.
Oh yeah.
Mickey shirts galore.
I haven't stopped. I mean, I still got my Mickey hat on right now, right?
You do.
Dude, that was the best rest area I've ever been to for sure. Samudre
That's awesome. I'm glad.
Yeah. Man, that was awesome. All right, so you mentioned you're in South Carolina. I mean, I should have said this at the beginning. Do I need to address you as Dr. Mark Samudre? Would you prefer that?
You can just call me Dr. Dre for short.
Okay, yeah,
no,
perfect.
No, man, you call me Mark. A little bit about myself right now. I'm an assistant professor at the University of South Carolina in Columbia. Prior to this, Emily and I just moved from Lexington, Kentucky about 2 years ago. We moved because of me accepting this position at USC. And then in Lexington, I was working on my PhD in special education and board certification as a behavior analyst. So it's been a busy time in the past several years, but you know, we're happy to be here in South Carolina. It's a lot warmer and the summers are a lot muggier.
Right.
The bugs are a little bigger too. But hey, yeah.
You guys got a lot of frogs. I saw when we were down there briefly.
You know, and I still don't know where they come from, bro. It's and I feel like it's like man, I feel terrible when I mow the lawn
Oh man,
because it's
yeah.
just I see so many frogs flurrying. I don't know if we have to include this in the podcast. I mean, it's just
I mean, it's a family
it's
show, but I'll leave that in.
South Carolina has its share of wildlife, that's for sure.
Yeah. So man, that's crazy, man. I don't know if you expected to go down that journey, but that sounds like quite the detour from. So, for those of you listening, Mark and I were in the same classes. Me, Mark, and Caitlin, English majors at Little Old Radford, down in Southwest Virginia. Then Mark went on to do his. Did you do master's first, and then your PhD?
Yeah,
Now
yes,
you're at USC.
I did my master's, and then I was teaching in DC Metro for some time, and then it was during that time where the thought of pursuing my PhD in this field kind of stuck a little bit, and so I started applying, and then there was just a lot of incentive for us to go to Kentucky. My wife's family was there. We wanted to be closer to them. I just had a really good relationship with the person who would be my advisor, et cetera. Plus I'm a real fan of college basketball. And so it was a pretty electric place to be at Kentucky. If you're a fan of college basketball, that was really exciting for me. And then I accepted the appointment here at USC. And so it was a nerve-wracking time when I was going on the job market, because if it wasn't here, it might have been somewhere on the West Coast. Because in this field and in this game, it's kind of, you go where the job is.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Man, what happened to? All right, I'm gonna go off too many tangents. But what happened to Kentucky? They're not even around.
I don't even want to talk about that, man, but I will. It's just, I want to say it's rebuilding, but it's really not. I mean, every monumental team, like as monumental of a team as Kentucky has been, and those blue blood college basketball teams, there's always bound to be that year.
Right.
This was that for us. We were just terrible. We couldn't be cohesive. We just couldn't play ball. There was a lot of teams that were better than us. I mean, we didn't deserve to be in this tournament this year. That's okay. A lot of other good teams do. And my bracket is still doing well, so we're okay.
Man, I got a confession. I didn't even fill out one bracket. It snuck up on me. I follow the NBA a lot more closely nowadays, but yeah, I didn't even think about it. I didn't purposely not. It just happened, and one I think the Thursday it started, I turned it on. I was like, oh, the tournament started. Anyway, I'm out of the loop, but I did see Kentucky, Duke. That was another team. I thought all those. I mean, Kentucky and Duke alone. I'm like, man, what's going on? How are they not in the tournament?
I mean, 2020 was a year, so right. I think 2020, 2021, it's just been, it's been somewhat chaotic. So if you forget that there's a bracket to be filled, I promise you there's some grace to be given there. Of anything.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it sounds like it's been a crazy tournament. I watched a little bit, but sorry about your Wildcats.
All good, man. All good.
Yo, let's dive in a little bit. Those of you that can't see us, there's a podcast, obviously, so you can't see us. Mark, you're Indian American, correct? And we've had a lot of conversations over, well, maybe not a lot, but a good amount. Definitely not as many as I wish we would have had in our time knowing each other. We went to school together, lived together, part of each other's weddings, but we haven't talked a lot about the stuff that we're going to talk about here on this episode a lot, I think, until maybe more recently, right?
I think it was the start of quarantine.
Yeah, when
we kind of just reconnected over some of these topics.
Right. So man, let's just start as an Indian American man grown up in America. How are you doing with 2020, the election, President Trump, all behind us, yet still so much to heal from? How are you doing personally?
That is such a loaded question. And it's is there a clean way to even approach that? I don't know. But in summary, I think I'm just tired, I feel like, 2020 had its challenges alone with the pandemic, but then take that aside, and I think this would have been a tumultuous year without it,
Yes.
With Trump's presidency coming to an end, but of all of the happenings before the end of his term, being an Indian American in that time, I mean, just being brown in that time, it was, I think I got so hypersensitive and hyper aware of my surroundings over these past several years. And I don't know, I just don't know that there's like a clean way to even approach that question, because there was so much baggage that I think a lot of people, not just Indian American people, but people of color carry as a result of everything that's happened. But it's just like, David, I don't know, should I just start at the beginning, like 2015, 16, when Trump was running? I think I just saw, for me personally, I think I started feeling very insecure in my place within white communities. And so I'll kind of backtrack a little bit. When I lived in DC Metro is where I grew up. It's where my best friends are. It's where my family is still. And so growing up there, I was never the only brown person in a room. And, I moved away from there, and this isn't a knock on Lexington, Kentucky, but I started realizing, wow, I'm the only brown person in this room. And then it escalated to, I'm the only brown person in this room, and I'm in a red state. And we have Trump at the podium saying all these things in an election year. And then it escalated even more to where, oh, wow, he just won. And so being a brown person, during all of that, I think I developed insecurities that I think were always there, but were just somewhat dormant. And I started realizing that, I've always steered clear of people who wore racism as boldly as a scarf, but then there were people who wore racism as their stealth passenger. And then the election kind of brought that out. And, you don't notice it upon like initial interactions. There's nothing about their overt behavior that suggests that they are racist. But then there are things that they might do that suggest that they hold and cling to biases that prevent them from actually even coming close to any kind of racial reconciliation. And I don't know if any of that makes sense, but I think that's just kind of the trajectory of like how I've been personally. And, I don't want to make it a secret. I am very glad that Trump is no longer president. I think there was a lot of damage that occurred as a result of that. I think there would have been damage no matter who won. But I do think in terms of communities or people of color, I think there was so much damage that it's just hard to like really piece a lot of the things together as to like what damage has been done, what can we do to repair it? What do we do moving forward? I think there's so many layers to it. So,
yeah, that's good. I mean, I think you touched on it some, but you mentioned like you didn't say paranoia, but maybe being oversensitive to things. Can you I don't know, can you speak into that a little bit? Because what I think I understand what you're saying, because I think I'd share the same sentiment, but with the hypersensitivity, would you say that it's more, I think that's the product or the result of just racial trauma and I guess the traumatic climate that's out there right now, or that has characterized the last 4 to 5 to 6 years, which does coincide with the last presidency, not solely, but does coincide with it for sure. I think for me, I'd explain that as like having to deal with knowing that could be being oversensitive or are being oversensitive, but you don't know if you feel like you have another option.
I'm glad you asked that. So I can clarify that hypersensitivity, that hyper awareness, I feel, personally speaking, it has more to do with just like, if I stumble upon an interaction that probably had microaggressions all littered in there, or if I am in an uncomfortable situation to where that suggests that there was probably racism, apparently occurring and enacted towards me or someone close to me, I might sound the alarm and say, man, I was really uncomfortable in this situation, and this is that, and that was this. But then people might discredit that and maybe claim that it was, you sure it was that? I mean, this is the only thing that happened. And it's just kind of like, you know, and now stepping outside of like my personal experience, like if a person of color has an inclination to say this is an uncomfortable situation because there's some layers of like racial significance underneath that interaction, that statement, that tweet, that Instagram post, etc. Trust them in saying that, hey, there's a red flag here to be raised, because they probably have the insight, the experience, and history to understand and recognize, stealth racism or overt racism when it occurs.
Yeah, it's almost like, what do you have to lose from listening and believing somebody that is sharing something like that? Like it's telling to me in an unfortunate way to hear a lot of people have that reaction of trying to explain something away, or saying, are you sure? And where's the care, and like what do you have to lose from listening to somebody? Because really what that's communicating is, I don't believe you, it's not valid, or whoever's saying that, I'm not willing to really delve deeper and unpack that, which I think there's just a failure to see the flip side. And there's so much more at cost to not validate people crying out for help.
Yeah. And I think, and I don't want to take credit for this. This is a quote I saw somewhere, and I can't recall where I saw it, but it's, if you raise an issue and people call you out for your sensitivity on it, it's usually, in other words, them saying, I don't feel like changing my behavior.
Yes. I'm with you.
So it's just,
I've seen versions of that. Kind of all over, but absolutely.
And I wish I could name where I've seen it exactly, but like I've seen it in numerous places. So it's either, I don't feel like changing my behavior because I was the one who actually did X, Y, and Z, or, I'm defensive because this is my hometown and this is not a quote unquote racist place,
or that home country, or taps into the nationalism and where your allegiances lie.
Yeah. And so, we saw a lot of offense taken when people started kneeling during the national anthem.
Oh gosh.
And so, because there was a deep offense taken, and that's not to discredit what people sacrifice to fight for, but that's what it turned into.
Yeah.
And so I think that was a very complex argument, but it's one that was like the sole intent of it was actually purely missed among people who really took deep offense at other people kneeling during the national anthem.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great, and obviously one of the most public examples for sure, the kneeling. So you mentioned more like where you grew up. So you've been, really diverse metro DC area, Virginia. You went to school in Radford, which is where I'm still at. We could talk about that a little bit. But then you went to Kentucky, now South Carolina. South Carolina, I associate a lot with, not to paint with broad strokes, but super red state, deep history of racism, very deep, much like Virginia. You're there, you're liking it, you're liking your job. Can you talk, you share a little bit, can you talk about, the different areas you've lived and maybe the differences in how the atmosphere has been for you, and maybe how that, I'm really, a bad habit of mine is asking really complicated questions that are too wordy, but how does like academia, your role with academia kind of blend with where you're living?
And that wasn't a bad question, David. I have a bad habit of just talking until I eventually arrive at the answer. So together, I think we're just a formula for a really long podcast episode. But here we go.
I got nothing to do for the next 3 or 4 hours, so.
No, man, I'm good too.
Yeah, kids are down.
I hope listeners are in for it.
Yeah.
So, I'll start with like Radford, the experience there. Actually, no, I'll kind of start globally speaking. So I've been in higher education really since 2007, August 2007. And I started, of course, as a student in higher education. And then, fast forward to 13, 14 years later, I'm now a professor in higher education. But through all those experiences and through all those different geographic areas from Southwestern Virginia to Kentucky to South Carolina, no matter where I was, whether it was a red or a blue state, or a red area in a blue state, I always felt like this pocket of protection in higher ed in a weird sense. And that did change over time through various experiences. And especially here in South Carolina, where I step outside of the city limits and I feel a pressure of being like, okay, now that what I spoke about earlier, like I walk into a room and I know I'm the only brown person there. Right. And so, there is this pocket of protection in higher ed where I can walk throughout my building and I know I'm going to run into diverse communities or people of different ethnic groups, sexualities, diverse belief systems. And there's comfort in that because and I'm not the only Indian American in my building. In the College of Education. So there is some value and volume to that.
Yeah.
But step outside of that. And that's where, some of my experiences that were unfortunate occurred. In Radford, it took different shape because I felt like I was I still am immature and I steadily grow more immature with age. But in my time at Radford, I think I was I just wasn't versed in terms of or recognizing when racism was racism, or when a microaggression was actually a dig at me, and my ethnicity, versus just a friend making a casual joke. So in Radford, and really even in high school, embarrassingly, dude, I feel embarrassed about how little I appreciated and valued and displayed my culture, and there's, I felt like sometimes with being Indian American, we had these stereotypes of we're either, we make average to higher than average family income and we're doctors or something, or we're at a more of a low income or socioeconomic status, right? Okay. And then there were all these punchlines with Indian Americans, I felt like at the time. Punchlines that,
Like what?
People telling me on command to do the Indian accent because they thought it was hilarious. Right? People jokingly asking me what field of medicine do I plan on going into? Even today, when I'm introduced as Dr. Samudre, people assuming I'm in, medicine. But, so in Radford, I embarrassingly would just engage in that stuff. I would soak in the stereotypes. I would try and beat people to the punchline. And I was really and I wasn't pressured into doing it, but I felt like I was trying to establish some white adjacency or white assimilation there, because it's I wanted membership in this community. I knew yeah, I'm the only Indian American I see in the Bonnie right now. Right. Bonnie. Remember that?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But
sad face. Pandemic. We don't hang out on campus very much, but yeah. Anyway, keep going.
No. Yeah. But there was just something heavy about and I really didn't piece this together and feel shame for it. I would beat people to the punchline. I would do the Indian accent before they asked me to do it because I recognize, this makes them laugh. And I love making people laugh, and I'm a people pleaser. But at what cost? I did it.
So a self-preservation, self-protective kind of thing?
Self-deprecation.
Man, okay, man, yeah.
But it was on command, people would I do the Indian accent. And I was like, man, whatever.
Man, all right.
And then people...
Sorry, I'll cut you off. I want to maybe even confess something. So I remember, I don't know if have prompted you individually, but I remember maybe I asked you, tell me if you remember, asked you to do, certainly at some point, an Indian accent, like tell a story in Indian accent or something, remember it being really funny. And yeah, that sticks out to me. So like one, I'll just say like I remember at least being somewhat part of that. So do you feel, you explained what you think about that in general, but like looking back, how do you feel about that having taken place now? I guess you kind of just said that, but
Yeah. No, I can. I feel like I was the person who evoked that the most.
okay.
And so I actually take more ownership over those interactions between a lot of my friends at Radford, you know?
Is there a
And
world
so,
now where you feel comfortable doing the Indian accent, as you said, to be for fun?
no,
Okay.
there isn't. And that's just because I don't see what purpose it would serve. I can tell the story without doing, of like any interaction with my family. I tend to like adopt how they convey or their intonation and their accent. I don't need to do that though, because I don't want people seeing the value of the story that I'm telling in the accent versus the actual interaction. And so I really try not to do it anymore. And I didn't realize, David, that embarrassing my culture and misrepresenting myself so significantly until really like my oldest brother said something to me about it. It's like, why do you do that? And I said, oh crud, I don't really know. And I think there was some like desire for white adjacency there. There was some desire for membership, and I love making people laugh. And I love like membership in those communities, and all my friends were white except you. And so it was just something that I just went to. It was a go-to comedic punchline for me. And it's so embarrassing to say that, man, my culture was that to me at that point in time in my life. And luckily, like I've grown out of that, and I've grown into, a person that I hope now. I have a daughter. She is just turned 1.
So cute.
And, for those, she is all kinds of cute, man.
Oh yeah.
She just turned 1, and I am in an interracial marriage. My wife, Emily, is white. And so, it holds different gravity for me now because I make those jokes. Look, my daughter is part Indian. So like that is damning for her as much as it is for me. In my culture, self-inflicted macroaggressions, they mount up and they become, I don't know, they just become who I am in social circles. And that's what happened at Radford for me. And that's embarrassing for me, and this isn't, to all, I just want to make like a PSA to all our Radford friends that might be listening to this podcast. There is no, like, my intent in communicating this is not to incite any kind of like ill feeling or guilt or whatnot, because I evoked those situations and scenarios more than anyone else. And it was just, I take ownership of that, and I also take ownership of not actually discussing or stopping during my time there. But that's not the only instance of that happening. That's just the most frequent one, David. But it was just, there are times where I just, tried to establish that membership in that community, knowing I wasn't white. And I couldn't, then if you asked me the same question, I couldn't answer the way I'm answering now, because I don't think I could have named it. And I think throughout the years, it's not that I've, I think for a lot of us, this is just a huge learning experience, but it's not that I've become better at addressing this. It's just that I've become better at naming it. And I'm still trying to figure out how to address it. So it's, it's an in progress situation, but.
Right.
So I'm sorry, I went into that pretty heavily, but that was Radford.
Oh man, that's great. And I think our Radford circles are here for this.
Yeah. And that was just Radford was like some of my most formative years. I loved my time there and the friends that I made there, like you and Caitlin. It was just, I really do treasure that time. But I look back and just think about I could have done so many things differently that weren't so self-deprecating, not just for me, but just like for my ethnicity, for my culture, for other Indian Americans. It was just, I could have done better. And so, traveling to DC Metro, like there was just this, like, I was reestablishing some comfort, right? I was no longer the only brown person in a room. And in terms of like hanging out with friends, like my brothers and I all have a lot of the same friends. And so in our communal friends groups, I was never the only Indian American in the group. And so that was comforting. And, even in like the school that I taught at, there was a lot of diversity there on the staff, in the student body. So there was just a lot of comfort there for me personally. And then, we moved to Kentucky. So I could pursue my PhD at the University of Kentucky. And that was when I started piecing all of this together, David. For me, I think my time there was super informing and just really valuable for me. And just we had a lot of time that we could spend with Emily's parents, who we're very close to. And that time was just really beneficial for me personally for a lot of reasons. But coming to Kentucky, I started feeling this deep insecurity that like I'm walking in and I'm the only person of color who's really at this football tailgate. Oh, cool. Or I'm walking in and it's like, yeah, I'm usually the only brown person in education, but this is a whole nother level. You know what I mean? Like, and there was just these situations. Any public place I go to, I found myself like desperately looking for another person of color. And a bonus points if I could just find another like Indian American, but it's just, I would really seek out that camaraderie. And there were pockets and communities of diversity in Lexington, Kentucky that, Emily and I were able to establish ourselves in, but there were a lot of uncomfortable situations and interactions and conversations that came about during my time there that really kind of turned the light switch on to like, okay, things aren't as rosy as I thought.
Okay. I got to ask, can you elaborate at all?
Yeah. There were situations thinking back to now that I feel like I can say for a fact that there was racial undertones in that. Some of these discussions were about larger social issues. So the BLM movement and the All Lives Matter movement, conflicting ideologies and differing belief systems, et cetera. But some of them were more like personal interactions that I had with several people in Lexington, Kentucky. And let me just kind of give like if I can for a moment, just provide some context to lay out Lexington. There is a diverse population in Lexington. Like I said, like the university, the city of Lexington is a college metro city, and it's situated around the University of Kentucky. So when at a major Research One institution, you're going to have a lot of pockets of people coming from all these different places, right? Most faculty are going to be transplant. And so, it's very uncommon for full-time faculty to have resided at the institution and gotten their degree from the institution that they're now faculty at. So everybody's a transplant, and that's comforting to a degree because, okay, so there's a lot of opportunity for diverse communities, but also like Emily was really involved in the arts, and there was a lot of diversity in those communities. And so we surrounded ourselves with people who, weren't necessarily like us. Step outside even further in the more suburbia, and it's not that like we encountered racism overtly. I mean, I feel like I did at certain points, but, I think that was where the differentiation between being anti-racist and being non-racist really came about for me. So, we have a lot of people in Lexington who passively reject racism, and any behavior that's consistent with being racist, they'll personally denounce it, but they'll make no personal movement.
Right.
to change or rectify a situation or to promote some kind of productive outcome from an interaction or a larger like global movement, etc. And then, we had anti-racism, which is the very opposite. It's not a passive rejection. It is an assertive, outright rejection of it and engaging in practices and behaviors that are inconsistent with racism. And so I kind of saw that in a lot of communities in suburban Lexington, and then there were situations where Emily and I would be driving and a guy would drive up right beside us and we weren't tailing him. He wasn't tailing us or anything. He would look at us and just give me the most disgusting look. And then I wonder what? And then he drives off and you see a Confederate sticker on the back of his truck. And sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, man, that I feel like that stuff is important to highlight when telling about our experiences, like your experience, because, man, I mean, the people who, I consider allies or my other friends of color who I'm in conversation with, but especially my white allies that check up on me, that's almost how I differentiate in my mind who I really would classify as anti-racist or just on my side, with stuff. And this whole side thing, I know, everyone wants to talk about how polarized everything is, and there's, a lot of people, especially maybe in our circles probably, that want to just have the mentality of can we all just get along and meet in the middle and have conversations? But that's why it's so hard, right? Yes, no one wants that more than us, I almost want to say sometimes, but we can't just start moving forward without addressing the past and history we're talking about, but also recent things over the last few years when you didn't believe me or us when I shared this story with you. I heard you say, "Oh, are you sure that's what they meant?" Or you shouldn't judge that person that's got the Confederate sticker on the back, which, sure, I don't enjoy making judgments or enjoy judging anybody. I don't think ultimately that's up to us either. But you feel kind of crazy if you continually feel guilty about sharing something you feel uncomfortable with or have experienced that's traumatic or racist, and you aren't believed. You're told to, oh, well, that you don't know them. We should get in the conversation and hear each other out, hear each other's perspective. And it's no, this is to me. I'm no, I'm not going to be, I'm just at a point, I'm not going to be told that I'm making stuff up when I know I'm not. Right? I'm not going to be told to, oh, instead of being scared or assuming they think these things because they got a Confederate sticker or Make America Great Again hat on, I'm not going to be told, oh, well, you need to just hear them out, hear their perspective. That might be another time, another day, somebody maybe I already know, but I'm not going to be, told when I know what people like that are associated with to just be cool with it,
Yeah, and I've heard of, but they're a good person, trust me. And I'm I'm not saying they're not a good person, but I think we're all products of our own environment, right? And I think people grow and engage in new behaviors when they change their environment. But also their beliefs are probably shaped a little differently once they change their environment. So if we're all products of our own environment, who's to say that this person's environment wasn't one that was a segregationist environment? Who's to say that wasn't the case? Or who's to say that this person didn't grow up in a place where, people with darker skin were seen as undesirable and people with fairer or lighter skin were not, or were more desirable. We don't have that barometer or predictors or for that person, but there is something, I think there is, I would hope that people, when we sound an alarm, right, that people would listen to the person of color who might have sounded the alarm, because there are situations that we do just have a better gauge of this. And why is that though? The reason for that is because we've grown up with the history of some of these things, whether we called it out by name back when we were 12 or we're sitting here and they're at age 32 calling it out now, you know, all of that stuff, just because we didn't do anything back then doesn't mean that we didn't actually connect the dots later on in life, that was something that we could have said something about.
Right. And I think that's the racial trauma aspect, which I'm absolutely no expert on. But I think there's also maybe this pushback I've experienced some, not from everyone by any means, but a sense of, oh, you're part of the culture now. You're being, what you mentioned, hypersensitive, and you just want to, you want to be the race police and pull all this, make everything about race. It's like, well, no, this actually is kind of traumatic to keep going over and over again. It's actually not enjoyable at all. Everyone wants to be seen, and that's, I just want this to be recognized. And like you said, I mean, I identify with that, a little bit. It's not that I'm purposely unpacking, like, all right, let me see how I can, come up with all these people to cancel now, because I remember getting, a microaggression they told me in third grade. No, it's not that. It's, oh, that actually shaped me growing up, like all those years being called, racial slurs or microaggressions, being, people pulling their eyes back and mocking me, or making a joke about rice or kung fu and stuff like that. And I'm not gonna separate that from something like Trump saying kung fu at rallies and having his supporters chant that, and then being emboldening racism. I'm not going to separate that from my experience as a kid growing up and experiences of kids growing up now. I'm not going to separate the rhetoric that has been peddled over the last 4 or 5 years even from the feeling of feeling sensitive and unsure of my surroundings. Because I mean, similar to you, where I feel very comfortable walking around the college campus, much more diverse, and just ideologies are much more diverse, obviously. And then, but I think differently around parts of my neighborhood, a lot of parts of my neighborhood. I live on a fantastic street, but close by, or literally today, I went in to vote. There's a guy at the door before I walk in, handing me stuff. It's a special election because somebody passed away, but a guy literally standing in "Make America Great Again" gear, handing me stuff. I'm trying to hand me stuff. Not seriously, I politely declined, but I'm just like, man, still. Anyway.
It's just, and it's not like we woke up and said, all right, today I'm going to be anti-racist, right? It's been a culmination of experiences, racial trauma, other interactions, conversations, etc., that have informed us to this point of saying, like, okay, like, this is alive and rampant, right?
Yeah.
And not say, you mentioned Trump. I don't think Trump, and I just want to be clear, and I think a lot of people would agree with this, Trump didn't give birth to this stuff.
Right.
You know what I mean? It was a fire that was already burning. He just poured accelerant all over it. And so he and that was the thing that bothered me so much about his campaign, was that was what it was, a means to an end for him, but he stoked all this racial division to get to a point, and it worked. And that was the most dissatisfying thing.
Yes.
In my lifetime that I witnessed, is that it worked. And that was when, I started seeing people's stealth passengers come out to play in regards to racism. People telling me on campus, in institutions of higher education, when I would express concern over the direction of our country for the next 4 years under this presidency, the Trump presidency, that is, and they tell me, oh, you're going to be fine, don't worry. When has racism actually impacted you? First off, there's so many layers to that question that you think you can ask me that, right? There's issues of white adjacency in that you can think you can say that to me. There's issues of like the model minority, the thinking that, like, does something racist have to happen to you to feel deeply and strongly about it?
Right. It's a product of like the individualized event or person, like or isolated event, right? It's like when something does happen, it's like all these ways to say it's an isolated event, not about race, stuff like that. And then, or then if, somebody like you or I speak up, and if we don't have something, super overt to give a concrete example about, it's like, oh, well, you're fine. It's like, well, I'll double down and say, like, to me, it's even more frustrating when people don't listen, who are the people that have said they want to listen. Like, I classify them kind of in different categories almost, because it's like, obviously I don't like the overt racist, but at least they're holding something that points them out. And to me, it's so difficult to navigate the ones that are openly, saying they're not racist, like they're not overt, flying the Confederate flag, but aren't doing anything to fight racism, the anti-racism that you're talking about, and certainly aren't the ones that, when you share your experience, especially when prompted, only to invalidate it and to rationalize the other perspective. Like, that's so much more hurtful than the person that is already just wearing it on their sleeve. And I'm like, okay, well, that's what I expect. But if it's somebody that is like, yeah, I want to learn, teach me, like, what do I do? I'm on your side. I want to be an ally. And it's like, well, I've told you, I've shared my stories. I've shared stories with my friends. I'm telling you what I'd like to see happen, what I want to do. And then crickets, so much more hurtful than from the person who's wearing it on their sleeve, to me.
100%. Because this is most likely a person you trust. You have seemingly, like, I can be friends with this person. Like, I don't know if I can be friends. I know I can't be friends with the person who's overtly racist. It's just incompatible with who I am. But, to a person you trust and love and hold very close to you, when they play like devil's advocate, right?
Yeah.
Against issues of like racial trauma or racism, yeah, that's going to hurt you deeply. And I ran into that a good bit in Lexington, dude. So, to come back to, I know we've come off on tangents, but to your earliest question about like kind of navigating us through kind of like the different places I've lived and different environments I've been in higher education, there was that protection. I step outside of that in a college in Metro City, and it's when I engage in discussions that people playing devil's advocate. I feel like I can't comfortably sound the alarm or red flags on like racist interactions, or I'm engaging in interacting with people who have very different and opposing belief systems than me in regards to racial reconciliation. And that happened a lot in my time in Kentucky. And that's, I feel like if there weren't a pandemic and we weren't quarantined for so long, it might have happened more here in South Carolina, but we've only been here just shy of 2 years. So it was just, the 4 years that we were in Lexington were, I think I grew up a lot. And one of the hardest days for me was watching the Charlottesville riots, or the white supremacy rally.
Yeah.
And then realizing just like this, I just remember feeling this like deep hurt. But just like, that was really coupled with an unfortunate experience I had in Kentucky with an individual who was white, who like put his hands on me and physically assaulted me. And this is a person who was seemingly like very successful. And, all of this happened at the same time for me, seeing the white supremacy rally and then having that instance where a white man put his hands on me. And this person was drinking. And we weren't at a bar, so it wasn't anything like that, but with the intent to hurt me, and having that happen, but also knowing like he's, but up to that point, he was very productive. He was very successful. And then that happened and his credibility, went to hell a little bit. And because of the interaction that happened, but then there was this other narrative about me in that mix, that I escalated a situation that didn't need to be escalated. And I just remember thinking like, what? I remember thinking, now there's, David, just to be clear with like listeners and viewers and stuff, that like there's a lot of layers to this interaction that still like hold like some trauma and just like really deep hurt feelings for me, for how some people react to the situation. And it was a situation in which like I really like came to grips with like allies and non-allies. But it was a situation in which this individual was drinking. There was a summer kid camp synchronously happening at the place that we were at. So I had to kind of quarantine him in a place. This person was getting aggressive, and then I couldn't let him leave because there was kids like right outside. And he, put his hands on me and proceeded to try and hurt me. Police were involved, but then the narrative shifted to when it came time to actually reprimand and actually discipline this behavior. The conversation then shifted to, do we feel like the person, me, escalated the situation? And so that was really hurtful for me, because it's like, that didn't happen, right? That I didn't escalate. I tried to de-escalate it. And luckily, like, there were people who I consider close friends and other colleagues that just really like stood by my side. No, this is unacceptable. And there was nothing that this person could have done, any person could have done, to really, really contain the situation. But dude, what happened after that, and I'll kind of get to why I'm telling this story, is that this person was then expedited through the program, and then he went on to be very successful. And there are a lot of other layers and interactions that happened with this person. But for me, I stood at the other end and being like, I was made out to be a bad guy. I escalated the situation with an instance where another white man, a man who happened to be white, and who also happened to be drunk, put his hands on me and this person. And now, like, in our communities and our pockets, I see this person pop up on my end, and this person's very successful. And it was partly because there was a silence about what happened. And so there was just like, I tell that story because there were so many layers of racism there. And this happened with people that I wouldn't have thought were racist. And I'm not saying anybody who sided a certain way was racist, but this is where the apparent distinction between anti-racism and non-racism came about for me, right?
Yeah.
Both parties view racism as aberrant behavior, right? They reject it. One is more assertive than the other, and the other is just a passive rejection. And it's passive, and I say this cautiously, but it's passive because it doesn't directly impact them.
Yeah.
Right? They're in communities where they're somewhat protected from it.
Yeah.
So, and I ran into that a lot in Lexington. And it hurt. It really hurt. And that's why it was a hard place to be at for a lot of reasons. It was also a great place. Like I said, we loved the family that we had there. And that was really life-giving for Emily and I. But when I stepped out of those pockets of protection with family at like in higher ed, I found myself like suffocating a little bit. And so I know we went down a deep tangent.
That's a good example. I mean, helpful example. Very helpful example for people listening, and helpful for me. I mean, I think the main question I even get asked the most is, how to be an ally and stuff. And I think it's important to, I'll just say it's not a, I'm going to come off pretty cynical, but it's not a club, right? It's not like you want to pick and choose people. It's more like a natural thing, and you either are or you're not. And I can think of the people, especially my white friends, that I consider absolute allies. They're not even the ones that want to be considered one, if that makes sense. Like, they do, but they're not caught up in, do you consider me an ally type thing. It's just like, look, I just know you are, and you're not. With these stories like the one you're sharing, that's a terrific example of just needing to be validated. I'd say it's not even, hey, will you just believe everything I'm saying all the time about race? It's like, can you just agree with me? Like, that's an ally. It's not just somebody that disagrees with you all the time. It's somebody, to me, that validates your experience, especially if it's traumatic, and especially if you're saying you want to hear and listen and learn. And so now I have a lot of friends. I have a lot of friends that even sent me a text or gave me a call, checked up on me and how I was doing this past week with the shootings that happened in Atlanta, and which I really, really appreciate. And then the people that I just know, like, I don't even feel pressure to respond. They know that I could not say anything or just give, I love the little thumbs up or heart thing you can just do to a text and stuff to acknowledge it, even give them one of those and get back to them later. But it's, so for me, like one of a personal experience I've had is, in Radford, we've been here about 12 years now. A few years back, I was out jogging. This has happened multiple times, but it happened for some reason within a close, one after the other kind of. When I was jogging, and I had younger high school, maybe older middle schoolers, essentially chase me for a little bit and harass me. Again, they're kids. I'm aware they're kids. I'm an adult. I'm running, but they stopped. Nothing came about it. But in that moment, there's 5 or 6 of them. I'm one person. It's just a lose-lose for me in every scenario you can play in your head. But that happening, I kept going. They stopped and didn't end up saying anything. But that just alone is traumatic. And when I say harassing, racial stuff, it's not something I made up. Like, if anyone, it was racial language. I can't separate that, and out of self-preservation and protection, I have to be aware how that is all interconnected, and that's what I want people to understand, meaning I can't not see how that is correlated or is interconnected with the Make America Great Again signs that are in the front yard of my neighbor, and then these kids are standing in those front yards, and then the former president, chanting racial slurs at his rallies, and then somebody professing the same, I'm a Christian, but the same Christian faith that president is professing throughout his tenure, then is a mass murder of people that look like me. Like, it's all interconnected, and that doesn't mean every single person that voted for him is gonna do that. I know that, but it's harmful to be told for that perspective and that sensitivity to seeing someone find a Confederate flag on the back of their truck driving next to me at Kroger. It's traumatic to not feel validated that that's something that I think about, and that's just something that I want people to hear me saying, and I know you'd agree with at least that much, and many people who I know that I just that's a thing. So if you're listening, this podcast is supposed to be educational, informative. Listen to that. Don't devalue our experiences, because that's real stuff going on, and we're not crazy. That's reality, and that's, Mark, I'll take us back to the beginning. What we're healing from. Things aren't rainbows and butterflies because we have a new president. I'm glad we do have a new one, but it's not rainbows and butterflies. We're still picking up the pieces, and who knows how long that'll take.
Mm-hmm. People couldn't see me, but on this Zoom call, I'm sitting there nodding my head and putting my hands in the air because, David, you were speaking truth. And I feel like, and what do you think about this? It's just, I agree with you. All of that stuff is interconnected, but people who defended the racist actions of former President Trump did so by focusing on minute instances where he would say, I condone this. And that was good enough. But then, there were people like us who were discredited when we said, no, but look at this pattern of behavior that's inconsistent with that one condonement. Right?
Yeah.
And it's just like, all of this stuff is interconnected. What he said, these signs, and like I said, Trump didn't give birth to this stuff, though. He just wholeheartedly made it worse. But he's kind of one piece on the chessboard here.
Yeah.
And we have it was a complex situation for a lot of other Christians too. And I think you touched on this a little bit earlier when you were talking. So I was trained to look at patterns of behavior and also look at patterns of behavior change. So
Yeah, tell
one
us.
instance, one instance of a good day, to where you condone white supremacy and you speak out against the Charlottesville rallies and stuff, etc., doesn't mean that you absolve yourself of anything racist leaning, right? And so looking at patterns, I mean, we knew when Trump condoned something, a day or two later, when he wasn't at a formal press conference, he was going to tweet something that was inconsistent with what he said, right? But then, the people who it might devalue or discredit the experiences that we would share would then hold on to what he said 2 days ago at that formal press conference in front of the scripted situation.
That's a good
right?
point. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
And so it's just what people hold on to are the better parts of leadership in our presidency from Trump. But we have to come to grapple with what damage was done off script. And that was the thing that people clung to.
Yeah.
And you know how we know Trump didn't give birth to this stuff. This country was founded on a lot of ideals that are inconsistent with anti-racism, right? But all of that stuff is problematic and moving us forward, and we have to acknowledge it as such. And so when a person acknowledges it as such, they have their experience should be valued, even if you disagree with it. I mean, you have to value that experience, because especially if you were coming from a white community and you might have not been in a situation where you felt personally harmed or inflicted in some way by some racial trauma, you don't carry the history of this. And so there's value that has to be given to people that might have, even if I'm like the model minority, right? Or even if I'm not, it doesn't matter. Like there's situations that, I encounter on a day-to-day basis that are very uncomfortable, and at its core are racist interactions, not day-to-day, but every now and then. And when they do happen, it just sticks with me. And I perseverate on it, and I think about it. And you know how I don't know if anybody else does this, but when you're in the shower, you reimagine an argument, and it's like, man, I totally would have won this argument, or I should have said this. Yeah. I win it every time in the shower, and I say what I need to say to call that person out for it.
That's the worst.
In the moment, it's the worst when you feel it in the shower and you know what you need to say in the shower, because in the shower is post hoc, man. And I'm sitting there thinking I'm paralyzed in the moment. Right? I don't know what to say. I don't know how to confront it. I don't want to be awkward, and I don't want to be, too abrasive, but it's I'm paralyzed. And then when you sit back and connect the dots a little bit more, you realize, oh, wow, I really wasn't. I mean, my intuition spoke some truth, I think, I
was going to say, I didn't say this about Charlottesville earlier, but you mentioned that as being a turning point, and I keep hearing that as kind of a turning point for a lot of people I talk to in my circle, especially my friends of color. For me, it was a big wake up, but I think it's important for me to point out, I don't know if you'll agree with this, Mark, it wasn't so much a turning point because of the overt racism that came to the surface. It wasn't, that was jarring for sure, but it wasn't emotional, and it wasn't, to me, that was not the emotional, terrible part. It was the conversations that happened afterwards and what I would have expected from my circle. Not everybody. I had, a lot of support from close friends and stuff, but, we're both part of the church and Christianity, and have large white circles, right? And so just the unsafe and unemotional and complicit response to what was happening just down the road, that was more the emotional part. It wasn't so much oh my gosh, I didn't fear for my life right away or anything like that. It was just, this is so much heavier than I would have ever thought something like this would be. It was just natural for me to be all right, this whole thing is an isolated, really stupid thing that everyone's going to be on board with, denouncing, and there's just a clear, cut and dry right way to respond to this, and that's not what happened largely. And to me, that was by far the most jarring, hard thing to I'm still processing it, but processing because it feels like another version of a Charlottesville thing just keeps happening ever since then. But since then, it's just been a wake up call of like, oh, I need to be thinking about this stuff. Like, I don't really have a choice. Like, I need to be educating myself, educating those around me, and I need to be speaking up about this. This isn't something I have a choice to, I'll try and, try and brush up on some history in this next year as a whole thing to do. It's like, no, this is going to actually be a lot of my life now, unfortunately.
And yeah, I remember going to our church the following Sunday after the Charlottesville rallies, and our church was silent on it. And I remember feeling just hurt. Just like how, if anything, like the church should be the loudest on this, should they not?
Mm-hmm.
But the day after, silence on it, nothing about it. They proceeded with the sermon as usual. And there was just like an extreme distaste in my mouth about that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there's also like there's also like a lot of pain when I see other Christians engage in behaviors that are consistent with, racism. And so, but without realizing it. And then it's like almost like the voice that they recite scripture with is so different from the voice that they enable racism to flow freely.
Yeah.
And so that is just a discouraging thing to see. And I think the church just in general, I think what I would have wished to have seen after the Charlottesville rallies was to our church just speak into it, acknowledge the hurt that it causes, acknowledge the wounds that it's probably opened up or reopened up, and say, like, as a church collectively, we move forward in like going against that because that is inconsistent with the gospel, that is inconsistent with the Christian faith.
Yeah.
But like our church didn't do it. And I mean, due to geographic locale, we of course left the church, but it was hard for us to resume membership in that community because of the silence of some of these things. And I think that's a big thing with allyship, silence in some sense is complicity. So, you might not be the ones out there inflicting the irreparable damage, but I would hope that everyone would see a cause to actually be more vocal about this stuff, and name it accurately.
Specific language is key.
Yeah. And so it's just, I continue to run into a lot of those experiences today. And you said something that resonates. This is going to be years of work, right? This is going to be life's work to repair some of this stuff. And I wonder, and I hope, like, we both have interracial children. I think about my daughter, and, growing up in South Carolina, I remember when Em and I were looking for houses, like, I don't want to stray too far from the university. Not just because of a convenient commute. That was probably like, third or fourth on the list. It was because I didn't want to put Ellison in situations where this might have happened. Cause it's hurtful when it happens to us, but like, I can't think of the hurt that I would feel if I found out it happened to Ellie, and it will in some time, but it's just like doing everything we can in that momentum to try and like make this situation better. But it's just, and I don't mean to say like the areas that we've lived with. And I just want to be clear with this. There's a lot of like life-giving conversations that happen in those places. And it happened here in Columbia. It's so that these are also situated in places that are historically, geographically, and politically red. And that is a hard place to be because it's a party that either single issue voters or they believe every drip of a word that Trump said. Right. And so, and it's a hard place to be.
One thing you said too, I mean, silver lining, and I say that kind of tongue in cheek. Silver lining is, I think I said this last episode with Debbie, but I have at the same time made a lot of new friends and allies and had some helpful, I think, conversations that would not have happened given had circumstances been different. And so that is some positivity. As much as a lot of bad stuff has come to the surface, some good has come. So I am thankful for that, very thankful. Probably more thankful given the circumstances, but nevertheless. And so we might be coming off a little bit cynical right now or in the pits, but it is, I think there's hope moving forward. Like, it's not too late. And that's the thing that is sticking out to me. One of the things that's stuck out to me a lot of reading and things I've watched of it's not ever too late. One of the main things that is so jarring is that how intentional a lot of all this stuff has been in American history, like racism. It's really easy to make it about, a cultural thing or a blind spot and stuff like that. And sure, there's a time and place to discuss those. Absolutely. Like, I have my own blind spots, but not at the expense of the overall, no, wait, this, like, it wasn't an accident. The country was founded on genocide. Slavery wasn't an accident. Jim Crow, segregation, racial shootings, those weren't, an accident. And so it's not too late to do things that can not reverse, people can't come back, but switch things up moving forward, which is why that's another, and I was trying not to go this way again, down frustration road, but that, to me, it sticks out like hope. There's hope moving forward. It's not that we're stuck. It's that we got to choose to move forward and not just say, oh, well, there's so many conversations to be had, all this, we can't change history. There's all these things. So, like, we just can't do anything. It's like, no. All this has been done intentionally, filled with complicity. We actually can do a lot. Just, are we going to choose to?
And I don't mean to sound like so cynical, but there is obvious hope there, and disagreement happens when one faction of people are moving and the other isn't, right? So there is movement, there is hope, there is space for some reconciliation in this. But a lot of that has to happen through the lens of, like, things are not okay.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'll even say, I'm in some very productive conversations right now, very productive, that me and those couple people or person, like, don't agree on a good amount of stuff, but so I just want to point that out. It doesn't mean you agree on everything. It means you agree on some things that you have to agree on to move forward. But yeah, I want to say that I'm in some very helpful conversations now that I don't see eye to eye on everything, but there's a lot of progress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, I'm a firm believer that a lot of people can grow and change when they change their environment. I do believe that. And I think some people, whether it's just like leaving home or just entering into new communities and spaces where you currently are, I encourage people to do that, because I think that's where a lot of different ideas and beliefs begin to merge. I don't think it does us any well to stick with people that look like us, talk like us, think like us. And I think there's a lot of beauty and diversity in that, but I'm kind of with you. I don't pretend that I have a blueprint for this stuff and what that's going to look like. I mean, I can barely follow an instruction manual on an IKEA dresser, let alone.
Oh my God. Don't. Those are the worst, man. Oh my gosh.
But, yeah, there is no one solution to this. But I can tell you what won't help us is to deny the experiences of people of color.
Yeah. I just did a mic drop. You guys can't see me.
Yeah. Don't drop that mic, David. It looks expensive.
Yeah.
No, but like that, we can accurately name what won't help us. That's what we can do.
Okay.
So, and that is step, that is momentum, that's movement, in whatever shape or form it might be. Something encouraging, David, that's been happening on our campus at USC. So, we currently have buildings that are named after prominent segregationists in the 19th and 20th centuries. And one of them, Strom Thurmond, it's our main rec facility. One of the most frequented buildings on our campus is named after the most prominent segregationist in political South Carolina. That's just like, I guess I didn't even think, being in higher ed, to think of like the history of like who these buildings were named after, right? But then hearing that, it's just, but there's momentum on our campus and our university into like, okay, let's change these. Like these aren't consistent with what we feel, what we believe in our core values as the university. They're in a process of reconsidering, renaming a lot of buildings, and that's just one of them. There's like, I think I saw a list of, I looked at the list some time ago. It was like 5 or 6 or 7 buildings that are named after prominent segregationists, ones that fought against anti-segregation laws, So, and then like, reading the stories of students that have come forward on our campus about that stuff, and just saying like, I'm a Black American and I lived in a place that was named after a person who thought that slavery was a necessity for the growth of America. Yeah. And it's like, ooh. So, even locally, David, I just share that because like there's some movement happening.
That's great.
And there's optimism in that, but we have to be able to accurately say what won't help us. And I think that's going to be paramount to any, systemic change. If we're going to move the needle, we got to move the needle, but, we got to name what things are going to hold it back. So
like celebrate the things like that, like name changing of buildings like that, but know that needs to just be a drop in the bucket. Man, all right. As usual, I wish we could keep going, but let's. I always like to end with some recommendations. So, man, what do you got for us?
I got some. This might have already been said on a previous podcast, but 13th, a Netflix documentary about the rise of incarceration rates for Black Americans, but also how that intersected with political climates. That's a really strong one. Asian Enough. I don't know have you heard of that one?
No.
Oh man. So I haven't listened to all of it, but so it's a podcast that talks through different experiences and different cultural aspects of Asian American populations.
So I wouldn't like that.
People like Kamala.
That's awesome. I've never heard of that.
Yeah, Asian Enough. They interviewed like Kamala Harris, Padma Lakshmi. I listened to her and she talked about how Indian cuisine and how that cultural aspect of being Indian American, and how that also intersects with like it's just solid gold. I highly recommend it.
Absolutely.
I just recently started listening to this one, so this is creds to my cousin who recommended it to me. Desi American Life. It's a podcast. And finally, I got one. You might laugh at me for this, but bro, there's significant representation in this movie, and I didn't realize it until I rewatched it. But Brandy Cinderella.
Oh yeah.
Heck yeah. Yeah. And like when I watched it as a kid, I was like, oh, this is cool. I like Brandy, right?
Yeah.
But then like watching it in 2021, I'm like, oh my God.
This is how unaware. This is how unaware I was. Yeah, I mean, Caitlin's obsessed with it, so it came right when it came on Disney Plus, about a month ago or something. She watched it like I think 3 times in a day. We watched it the first night it came out, but I mean, I remember it. I mean, I loved it as a kid too. But I guess it might sound a little bit hypocritical because I didn't even remember the prince. And then we're about to watch it, and she's like, yeah, you watched this. Like, oh yeah, it's great. And she's like, yeah, and that it's awesome that the prince is Asian. I was like, wait, what? And like I did not remember. But yeah,
but like
perfect recommendation.
Think about that.
Yeah.
But I'm watching this with Emily, and I'm like, oh my God, this is
it's ahead of its time.
This is pretty like. This is some pretty heavy representation, and in traditionally white roles, right? We have Brandy, we have freaking Whitney Houston as the fairy godmother. Rest in peace. and Whoopi Goldberg as the queen. Like, this is awesome. I mean, so that might be a silly recommendation, but
no, that's great. I was recommending high school rom-coms last episode, so you're good.
Oh, which ones?
The To All the Boys I Loved Before on Netflix.
Oh,
you gotta check it out. Yeah, have you seen that?
I haven't seen it, but I've heard
of it.
Man,
they're good. No shame. Watched it. They're real good.
I would probably love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. I think that's all I got for resources.
Yeah, I haven't.
Oh, also, Anti-Racist Baby. We got that for Ellie.
I heard of that.
And if you have kids, and you wanna, so the content and the language is pretty complex.
Mm-hmm.
And Ellie just turned 1, but the pictures are really, illustrative, but just diverse. And I think they do a good job of kind of communicating some intent behind the story, even if she can't understand the language. So I think that's a really strong resource for them.
Yeah. I'd also recommend, I posted about this earlier, Caitlin got this as a gift for her birthday from some friends, but Eyes That Kiss in the Corners, a book by Joanna and Dung Ho. Excuse me. Very good. I mean, even if you don't have kids, I recommend getting it for some kids, family, nieces, nephews, stuff like that. As somebody that just can identify.
That pop up a lot.
Yeah. Somebody can identify with, I mentioned earlier, with being mocked for even the shape of, my eyes and being called different things. That was just, I was emotional reading it to my kids because just a really, really good book that gives you pride for the very thing that I remember being joked about at times growing up. So it's differently having kids, but I've recommended for everybody that. And I haven't watched the 13th still from Netflix. I keep that. I mean, that's been out for forever and getting recommended. But I was in a book discussion group with some colleagues at the university last semester, I think. We're doing Ibram X. Kendi's book right now, How to Be Anti-Racist. But we read the new Jim Crow, which I think which is very tied to what 13th is about with mass incarceration and the political climate. And again, I'll put all these in our show notes with links and stuff for everyone to check out. So everyone do your homework for Dr. Samudre.
And don't forget to put Brandy on the list of resources.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Brandy Cinderella.
I almost don't want to because I'm like, if you don't know what that is, I can't help you.
Just get a Disney Plus subscription, folks. Come on.
Yeah. All right, man. I say this to everybody, but you got to come back. This is great. So much more I know we could have talked about. But this is awesome. Thanks for coming on here, man.
Yeah. Love you, brother. Thank you, man.
Yeah. See you guys next time. Thank you all again so much for listening. As always, please remember to check out the show notes to get all the links to all the things that Mark and I referred to throughout the episode. Our artwork was, of course, created by the great Ashley Bush, and our music was written and produced by the also great Dylan Dent.